Today on Breaking Badness, we are celebrating our 200th episode. Join us as we take a stroll down memory lane, speak with a very special guest, and talk about the evolution of cybersecurity since we started this podcast 6 years ago. With that, Breaking Badness is next. Welcome to Breaking Badness special 200th episode edition recorded on Thursday, February 6th, 2025. I'm your co-host, Kali 200 Acrewood Fencl. With me are co-host Tim, seeking only deeply Helming, and Taylor forgot to put in his fun name Wilkes-Pierce, along with very special guest Allan, clip show, look it up on TV tropes, Liska.
Woohoo!
Hello, everybody.
Taylor, it's not fair. You forgot to put in your name and you still got the chuckle from Kali.
Just for reference, the stuff that's in brackets wasn't supposed to be read.
Shoot.
That
Let
is
me-
a script note, but that's okay. I think it made it even
Well,
better.
Here's the thing. If anybody reading our script maybe needed to look it up, so might some of the audience. So
That's
it's
fair.
fair. It's fair. It's all
I'm a
good.
nerd, but I didn't need to look it up. I'm like, I know what this is.
Now that we live in the world of 6 show episodes or 6 show seasons, there are no such thing as clip shows anymore. Because you needed those when you were doing 23 shows a season, and you needed a filler show at the end of it. So
We'll all
Your camera was like auto zooming.
Let me match
Yeah.
your energy.
we'll match your energy.
My camera has like these weird AI gestures, and sometimes I do them and don't know that I'm doing them,
Mm-hmm.
and then I don't know how to undo them.
I wish just saying undo, just undo it.
Right.
But
There's probably some larger metaphor in there about the surveillance capitalism world we live in or something like that, but it's not coming to mind just a second, but I'm sure it's in there.
Agreed.
so we've got Allan, super large on the screen with his camera. We got Taylor, who's in an undisclosed location.
Against his will or not, we'll let you decide by the end of the show.
Tim you're in old timey Seattle, right?
That's correct.
Yes. And I am in my blurred office because I don't want everyone to see how messy it is in here. So we all got it going on. Oh, Allan, you fixed it.
I went and used the manual controls.
Okay. Cool. We're so glad to have you, Allan. You are, again, we owe you probably 2 5-timers jackets at this point because you've been on the podcast so often.
It is a real honor to be here, and I love everything you all are doing with the podcast. Last week's episode in particular, I don't know when this will air, but I'll say the last one that I saw about the kind of the mental health and everything, such an important topic, and one that just, even though we talk about it more than we used to, there's no stigma against it anymore. It still doesn't get talked about enough. And especially in my world of ransomware, where there's so much rampant burnout, especially after an attack and so on, I can caution people all that I want, and I do, about the kind of burnout you get after a ransomware attack. And it still happens because it's hard to admit that we're human, right? That we need that time away.
I also think it's true that while we're seeing this more openness about mental health concerns within the cybersecurity community, which is amazing, that doesn't mean that stigma isn't still causing problems for people in the rest of their world.
Yeah.
So it's good that this is a space where we're starting to see some really good changes that way.
Allan, do you think ransomware threat actors also feel burnout or have mental health issues or nah?
Have you seen some of the interaction on the forums? Like if you look at the underground Russian forums like ISS and some of the others, there's just all kinds of mental health issues on display there. And a culture that really doesn't accept mental health issues. Absolutely. We have seen ransomware actors post drunken videos about government and researchers and so on. When you are, especially now that there's been so much law enforcement activity against ransomware actors, whether they want to admit it or not, they are under a lot of pressure, because it's not just people like me and Taylor that are hunting them down. when you have the intelligence services of governments hunting you down, you really don't get to make a mistake, because if you make a mistake, you're going to jail.
And you
Which is
don't get
what we
to have
want.
had made a mistake 10 years ago, 50, right? Like
Yeah.
Right.
you could have
Right.
made mistakes
Exactly.
you won't even know about.
And how many times have we seen it? And like chain analysis, I know they just released their amazing cryptocurrency and ransomware report, which is incredible. But like kings of, in Jackie's case, the queens of finding those mistakes, finding that one Hotmail address associated with a wallet 10 years ago when you weren't even thinking about doing ransomware, and now they have you, and they can not only track your all of your activities in the blockchain, but they can put a name to the email address.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we from our side, it's like the old who is data where you may have co-located like your first bad domain with your web hosting company 15 years ago for 20 minutes in DNS. And then boy,
Yeah.
Or you leaked a SOA record or something like that.
yeah,
By the
yeah.
way, backing up a couple of steps, because we may have very new viewers, listeners. Allan is the ransomware sommelier.
Yeah.
So you should probably tell us all a little bit about that, Allan, just for any newer folks.
Oh, I just make comic books now. I don't do ransomware anymore.
Fair
No,
enough.
I'm kidding. I wish that was the case. One day I want to be like on a stage giving a talk about ransomware, and I want a bunch of people there going, "Why is this comic book dude talking about ransomware? What does he know?" Yeah, I know you all have heard this story before, so I'll try and make it real quick. Back in 2014, I was working for FireEye, and FireEye very much was pushing all of the nation state activity that was happening at the time, but all of the clients that I was working with had a ransomware problem. Now it was Locky and Cerber, it was a single machine ransomware, but they were getting hit 7 or 8 times a week in these large companies, wiping the machines, restoring, and it was getting annoying. And so I was working with the Mandiant side and the detection side of FireEye to build detections in the FireEye products for this ransomware activity. And I had a buddy over at Symantec who was running into the same problem with his customers. They were going around talking about Stuxnet, and all of their customers were going, "Great, but I'm not a nuclear facility in Iran. I don't care." He was also having that. So we got together and we wrote our first book on ransomware back in 2016. And then it just escalated from there as ransomware continued to be a problem. I've continued to be in demand. And so for 10 years now, all I've been able to ever talk about is ransomware. It's nice that I'm needed, but I'd love to talk about anything else in security.
We can talk about our stuff. We can talk about the Breaking Badness journey, which we talk about ransomware, but we're going to talk about a lot more than that. And the reason I wanted to include you on our 200th episode, Allan, for our listeners is you've been a champion of ours for a long time, which we greatly appreciate. I know we've got a lot of listeners who listen every week like you do, but you're so vocal about it. You're just, yeah. So we're just like, I have to have you on here. Talk with us on our bicentennial episode just to take that stroll down memory lane together.
Yeah, I just need to get you all over to Blue Sky so it's easier to share the links and the tweets and read whatever you do on Blue Sky.
Oh, have you moved over there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We have the real estate. We just haven't been.
I'm over there.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I know the other option is Mastodon, but Mastodon just doesn't click with me. I've tried and tried. It just doesn't work.
Gotcha. All right. We can absolutely make that an action item for at least for me coming up.
Don't do it on my behalf.
Wow.
But
yeah, so Breaking Badness began in 2019. It was before my time, before Taylor's time, I think. No, were you there? Were you on
yeah.
the? Were you on the-
Yeah.
Pretty much beginning.
Well, okay, so yeah, so you've been here since the beginning, essentially. And Allan, have you been listening since the beginning?
I think pretty close to it. I've always been a big fan of domain tools. I think Tim, obviously, he and I talked at a Mandiant conference several years ago, like before the podcast. And the other Tim, I'm a big fan of his. I've had a chance to sit and chat with him a few times. So when I saw you all were launching a podcast, I was like, oh, this is awesome. I definitely want to listen to that because your intelligence and your data set is so unique that I knew the show was going to be interesting. And I was a big fan of Kelsey as the leader. And I'm always a fan of dad jokes and puns, which is your brand. not domain tools brand, but your podcast brand, dad jokes and puns, and great intelligence. Like, what else? What more could you want out?
For sure. How is the show, as our guest, how has the show evolved in your eyes?
There's no Kelsey anymore. Callie,
She's still around.
yes,
She's
yes.
just
She's I know that she's gotten promoted a few times and has a lot of really important work to do. But Callie, you're amazing. In addition to being my second flavor of Linux, you are my favorite podcast host. And I think what has improved is the tightness of the explanation, the communication of the intelligence that you're talking about, of the stories that you're talking about. It's always been useful. It's always been good. But I found that you've gotten better at distilling the information that you need and getting that out there. And the important thing is you haven't changed the hoodie ratings. The hoodie ratings have stayed the whole time. And that's important because we all need our hoodie ratings, and everything should have a hoodie rating.
I really do think we need to enshrine that in an April 1st RFC, like calling you to help write it.
The hoodie ratings have also spun out to the goodie ratings,
Yes.
Yeah.
which have also spun out to number of ants on a log.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's good or bad. It's ants on a log.
Because sometimes things aren't good or bad or indifferent. So you gotta rate
They
'em.
just are like ants on a log. It's an okay snack. It gets the job done.
Right.
Tim and Taylor, what about you? Again, have you been hosting the whole time, or have you listened and then co-hosted? Like, what's the lore?
There actually was a brief and blessedly forgotten precursor to Breaking Badness where I did a couple of Domain Tools podcast episodes long before I had any idea what I was doing. Not that may have changed a whole lot. But yeah, back in the before times when we were all in an office together, I was in there and I used to do a lot of the production stuff, editing and whatnot. And I still love doing that stuff. It's been fun both being part of the talking about InfoSec stuff and occasionally non-InfoSec things and working on the actual production.
Yeah, late 2019, you helped build the podcast room in the office, right?
Yeah, right.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not a podcast
That's
room
really
anymore.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, we had noise
have-
dampening. It was great.
We had a podcast area, but we don't any longer.
There's an on-air sign that we turn on when we go
Which is in
there,
my
which
house
is
now,
always
by
fun.
the way.
Oh yeah, is it on right now?
No, but interestingly enough, sometimes when I'm solo in the house right now, but when I'm not, I do use it occasionally as let's not vacuum right now outside this room.
Good
kind of
stuff.
nice.
Good.
I
It's getting its intended use across.
Correct.
Right.
What?
I don't know if you can read
Oh,
that.
Here we go. Hey, look, I think that's going to come in handy when we crack the code on the Johnny Dollar cinematic universe.
Interestingly enough, I just heard I happened to listen to an old episode of the original Johnny Dollar radio show the other day, which was fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah. We've, talking about comic books, we've actually been really expanding our universe. And so like we just released this, which is
And what's the title there, Alan, for people that are only listening to this?
It's a comic book based on two 1940s comic book characters, the Press Guardian and the Clock, and they have to fight Nazi saboteurs. So that was a really fun story to write because it takes all the pulp things that I love, but actually puts them in age, which is neat. And getting to punch Nazis is always a good thing to do. But what I thought was really fascinating about this is both the Press Guardian and the Clock the Clock started in 1936, the Press Guardian in 1940, but they were both gone by 1941. And they both fought Nazi stand-ins in their original run. But until January of 1941, most comic book characters wouldn't fight Nazis directly. So like in one episode, the Press Guardian fought the Monronia Bund, which was a stand-in for the German-American Bund, who everybody now knows because of the 1939 Madison Square Garden rally. And then the Clock would fight spies who were named Karl and Fritz, but again, wouldn't say explicitly German. So it wasn't until January of 1941, which, as most comic book historians know, is when Captain America punched Hitler right on the cover, that comic book industry as a whole felt that it was okay to go ahead and explicitly call out Nazis that you were punching.
Of course, they call them on TikTok Yahtzees.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you could get flagged on there, so you can't say that.
So you say Yahtzees. Interesting.
Yes. Yeah. So does anybody want to share any memorable moments that they particularly loved from Breaking Badness? And I can get things kicked off. I think one of my favorite things that has spun out of this show is actually we have a Domain Tools employee now, and we got him. He found out about us through the podcast. He listened to the podcast first and then found out about Domain Tools and applied for a job and got the job. And I think that's cool. That's his origin story. And that came from the podcast. That's Steve Beam.
Yeah.
The Beamster.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
I love it. So I was just on as a guest host at first. I was just because I happened to be in the office. and
Hey,
like,
anybody out here want to be a guest host? Taylor, come on.
and so that's when I came on. But I remember one of the first moments that I was like, oh, this is super cool is when we started doing like the voices from InfoSec and the summer camp stuff was like, oh, this is because telling the Monster of the Week story is fun and that's great. But then to build something where there's a community and people get to know people a little bit and we can let people talk about some of their favorite things inside, outside of InfoSec, outside of their own domain, perhaps that to me, those are always really fun episodes. But also, I think some of the early episode titles, like the episode titles were also what were like made me really want to sneak in there. Do you have anything planned for episode titles here? Is there like are we going to go down our top?
I don't have those because we did it on our rundown episode for 2024, like top punny things of 2024, but I don't have that here. If you wanted to list.
I'm looking at a few, right? So You Down with APT, Yeah Me is our episode 4. Right. So like right out of the gate, we were pretty strong. I think like that one holds up. Ides of Arch for my Linux fans. I know I think that's a really good one. I'm just looking through here.
Well,
then we introduced Two Truths and a Lie. There's an episode title.
This is a great example of the echoes of Kelsey too, down through the ages. Because of course the punny titles were probably completely or at least largely her brainchild at the beginning.
Hash me if you can.
Yeah.
Come on. Kelsey was cooking with that one.
Yeah. I love the punny episodes. And like now we have to put the punny name in the image because SEO doesn't understand our humor.
Oh,
no.
Which is unfortunate. Why we just need AI to catch up to understand our joke patterns.
it goes SE over its head.
Here's one. BEC you later. It's a good one.
Yeah, we've had some good ones. Any come to mind for you, Allan, that you remember?
The first one that Taylor said was the one that came to mind first, because that one, I think very early on, absolutely caught my attention. And I'm trying to think if there are any others, but Taylor, you also stole what I was going to say is my favorite. I think the voices of InfoSec, as much as I love hearing you all, the voices of InfoSec really do. And I've seen poor Kali running around the RSA floor, trying to tackle people into doing interviews, which is incredible. Like not to use comic book analogies, but she's like Lois Lane with the tenacity in getting those interviews because it's hard. It's hard getting people's attention. It's hard getting them there. But I know that everybody that I've talked to that has done an interview absolutely loves it and wants to go back and do more. And so I think that's always a good sign.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And one of the people that you introduced me to, Allan, John DiMaggio, he's one of my favorite interviewees, and he's been on the podcast a couple times now, which has been amazing. And I feel like each of us on this show has started to develop like our own relationship with him because of the podcast. Like, I'm friends with him because of the podcast. Taylor's been showing him cool stuff and Domain Tools, and it's just been great getting to have a personal and professional relationship with people like him. So thank you.
I feel very confident saying that I'm sure there are listeners to the podcast who themselves would be amazing guests. So if you want to be part of it.
Yeah, don't be shy. Let us know. We're very findable on everywhere, and I'll get on Blue Sky. I want to be everywhere all at once.
Curious about, this is my question for you, and it's unprompted. I didn't put it in the script, so I hope you don't mind. The social media and the cybersecurity podcast landscape has changed a lot since 2019. Is it more difficult for you all to get attention? You have your regular viewers, the ones who already subscribe, but is it harder or more difficult to get attention and get new subscribers to the podcast, given that things are a mess in social media world?
I would have to say that there was definitely a period of time there where I felt stagnant in our growth, and I do feel like it was correlated to this, what we're seeing in the landscape of social media. But I would say, so we started doing video, which is, what we're on now. So like you can either listen to this podcast or you can watch it on YouTube. And that's opened up a new audience for us where, you have people that prefer to watch rather than to listen. So I think doing stuff like that and then also doing like the shorts has really helped us expand our reach. We've definitely seen growth over the past 6 months, I would say, since we started doing video, which has been really cool. And yeah, like things are different on your different social media platforms for a multitude of reasons. But I would still say there's still people in our community that just don't want to leave X for whatever reason right now. Or like people that prefer, like you have people that prefer their brand social media, and we're there. Like we're trying to meet you where you are. But that's why I feel like we have to continue to, stay in certain areas because I'm still seeing success over here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you're seeing success, that's where you have to stay, where that success is.
Yeah.
And then a follow-up question to that. Do you have, like, we have the retail ISAC and we have the water ISAC and we have the IT ISAC. Is there for lack of a better term, an ISAC of cybersecurity podcasts like you and the defense and security guys and Graham Cooley and all the others that kind of ever get together and chat and discuss things on the sort of the back end?
If there is,
That would be cool.
that would be cool. If there was one, we haven't been invited to it yet. But
If you guys are out there doing that, invite them, please.
it would be great to talk to some other podcasters. I've talked to Graham a little bit. He's been on the podcast before, on our podcast
Yes.
before.
In fact, he might have been on 100 or 150.
Yeah.
He was on one, or at least he gave us maybe it was just a pre-recorded shout out. I don't remember, but he was on one of those big prior round number milestone episodes. Yep.
Yeah. And I did share the podcast with Jack Resider of Darknet Diary. So I hope he's watching. I hope that would be great.
One thing I would say if you're starting a podcast and you're looking to get some traction, I would go out and get stuff wrong on purpose and just get the flame wars going. I think that's a good way. Not our way, no, but
We don't have to just start.
I effortlessly get things wrong.
yeah, exactly.
I
We do
mean-
that on accident enough.
Sometimes you can get everything right and still somehow manage to start a flame war.
Oh, sometimes
That's when you know you're doing it.
Start a flame war.
I guess one thing about like getting newer listeners and like popularity of episodes is a few weeks ago, we had an episode where we talked about current events with DARPA, and that episode took off in particular, especially on YouTube. And I'm a little unsure why. Was it the DARPA aspect? We also talked about DNS in that episode too. It was a separate article. But I noticed that episode just went off like gangbusters and like really made the whole month. So I don't know what this group thought about that. Is that something our listeners want more of, or is it a fluke? Like what's going on there? What do you think?
I mean, DARPA has its like geek cred interest factor that I think will always be there, being the sort of progenitor of the internet and being where a lot of very interesting technological projects have come out of. That's going to get a certain number of eyeballs. And then DNS, come on, everybody loves DNS.
Yeah, everybody loves DNS. Can't get enough.
If you really want to up your geek cred and have and this be expensive and have the show go viral, talk about DNS and DARPA at Bletchley Park. And I think if you throw all three of those into the title, that everybody will want to click on that and read it. I think you can rent a room at Bletchley Park, so I don't think that'll be a problem.
Okay, field trip.
We have to Breaking Badness field trip.
There's one more thing. This is unmined gold for us, but I don't know if a lot of people know this, but one of our colleagues at Domain Tools in the day job is the author of the Packet Transfer by Avian Delivery RFC.
One of my favorite RFCs.
I did not know that.
Who is that?
Yep. David Weitzman.
Ooh.
Amazing. We work among royalty.
I
Ooh.
I found that out after I met him and had been talking to him, and I was like, wait,
Uh,
I've been
uh,
laughing about RSC for forever.
exactly. Yep.
When I was much, much younger, I was working at UUNet at the time, and I had to go meet and talk to somebody because we were doing something with our new data centers. And I had to go talk to some dude named Vint. And I'm like, "Vint, what a weird name. It's not Vince, it's Vint." So I went and talked to him and I had a meeting. And then a little bit later, somebody came up, "You got to meet with Vint Cerf?" I'm like, "Yeah, he was nice, seemed smart." "Yeah, he's smart." And then I looked him up and I'm like, oh crap. It's when you work with people who like, oh my God, they're amazing. It is really nice. And so I
Would
was,
change the world.
yeah,
It's like when I
exactly.
was a young musician and I did a gig with Skitch Henderson, who was on the Tonight Show years and before Doc Severinsen, like way back. And I told my folks about it. I was like, "Yeah, this guy Skitch Henderson, I don't know who he is." My dad's, "You're kidding, right?" And I said, "No, who is he?"
So, just to pivot a little bit, what do we think? We give a lot of advice on this podcast, in our gold guidance and grievances, and as well as when we do our hoodie ratings, like we talk about how dangerous something is, what people could do to mitigate those particular threats. But what advice do we think we need more of that people aren't necessarily taking still? And what could be maybe retired? What are we tired of hearing of?
Me, I'm tired of hearing patch your vulnerabilities.
Yeah, but patches, patches
That was just like taking out the trash.
Yeah. I,
word lends itself to puns, Alan. Like
there.
it rhymes with a lot.
I think for me, there were 53,000 CVEs last year. And so when we tell people to patch vulnerabilities, I feel like we're not telling them anything that's practical. Because, yeah, everybody knows they have to patch, but in any medium sized organization or larger, you're going to have so many vulnerabilities that it's impossible to patch everything as quickly as needs to be patched. And so we need to find a new way of expressing that, of expressing how you decide what the patch is. And there's a lot of debate in the InfoSec community about CVE and its usefulness. And I know there's CPSS and there are other ways of prioritizing your patching. But how do we communicate? How do you prioritize? If everything is a 10 for to use CVE nomenclature, then nothing's a 10. And I'm tired of that as blanket advice. Things that are better, things like, hey, make sure you're patching the things that are on CISA's Kev list, right? Something like that. Make sure that you are better prioritizing how you're going to patch. To me, just telling people to patch things doesn't actually help them. It's a platitude at this point, a problem. It doesn't actually solve any problems, I don't
I
think.
would argue that it's not only those things, which is entirely true, but there's this kind of implicit shaming underneath it. You're not doing it right. You're not doing it well enough, and bad you. And I think you raise an excellent point.
Anybody else want to share any advice that's good or tired?
From a good perspective, one thing that I have noticed in my time here at Domain Tools is that there is a lot of value in the just doing the same thing over and over again to a degree. Like we wake up and we get domain data and that is our continual thing. But there's nothing particularly difficult or tricky about it, but it's because we wake up and we do it, we stack it on top of the stuff from yesterday. And you can get these kind of broader, positive impacts that are much larger than you would expect from just, I got a domain ownership record. Okay. The sticking with it, the making sure that you do it right, set knowing perfect is the enemy of good and getting it done, and then stacking it and then looking at those effects over time. I think that's applicable not just in DNS but in broader parts of what we do in improving our security postures.
And the reps in.
Yeah, that's Tim, you're a musician. Muscle memory goes a long way to making sure you cover the basics. It's one of the reasons why I strongly advocate for tabletop exercises when
Yes.
you're talking about preparation for something. Because if you go through a real tabletop exercise where here's what's going to happen in the event of a ransomware attack or BEC attack or whatever it is that you are talking about, and you get used to that, and then you find the flaws in your tabletop exercise and build and improve those flaws when the actual event happens, there's a lot less panicking that's going on. There's more, okay, we know what we need to do. We know who we need to call. We know what we're going to get done. So I said something negative. Here's my positive. Do more tabletop exercises. And as always, I'll add, make sure you feed the people properly. Don't just give them pizza. Give them, unless it's really good pizza, not to pull an office pun from the good pizza place, not the bad pizza place.
By Alfredo or
Right.
Alfredo?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Good. Nicely done, Kali.
I love
Saying-
that.
Everything Alan's saying is very YouTube shortsable, I would say.
Mm. There's a new word.
Very cool. We are getting to the end of our conversation, but before we get to gold guidance and grievances, because I want Alan to be able to give us some gold guidance and grievances, because I'm sure you've got some good ones. Who would we love to see on the podcast from this group? Who did we like that we'd love to see? We'd like to see everybody again, obviously, but who hasn't been here maybe?
Jen Easterly.
Yeah,
Jen-
I was
100%.
maybe Jen or Brian Krebs or
Okay. Do any of us know them?
I wish I did. I've interacted with Brian over the years here and
Chris. Neither of the Krebs.
there. Yeah. Pick a Krebs.
Right.
Those are Krebses.
Yeah.
The Krebsification.
Yeah.
I found honestly though, like through doing podcast interviews, like reaching out to people are usually so nice to me. They're like, of course I'd be on your podcast. Like I don't want to jinx myself, but people have been pretty receptive to being on a podcast. So maybe we can.
There you go. Reach out to those folks.
Yeah. And I see on the outline you've got here, Tim, you put Sherrod. Is it Sherrod or Sherrod?
Sherrod, I assume. Although I've only seen her name in print.
Okay. So I always am unsure because we had a senator in Ohio named Sherrod Brown.
So I
So-
could be off. And
Sherrod's been on the podcast before. It's been a while.
yeah.
She could
Yeah,
definitely
we
come
are.
earn,
Yes.
earn her 5-timers jacket.
If one of y'all are coming out to SleuthCon, I'm pretty sure she's going to be there because she's one of the organizers. So maybe if you make the jump over to Virginia in May or June, whenever it is this year, you'd be able to say hi.
Yeah, that'd be great. Alan, do you have a dream guest that you'd like to see on Breaking Badness from a listener perspective?
I do, and I don't remember their name. Because I was thinking about this, and there was, you know who I would like to see? Eva from EFF. I think that would be a really great guest. I think her handle on, I think her handle on EFF on Blue Sky is Eva Side, but she's the director.
Same as their other ones. Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of really good advice, and EFF, I think, is going to be really important in the next few years.
They are.
Yeah. And
Oh,
they're
Doc-
important now, but I think they're going to be even more important. As somebody who I think would be a really cool guest, that would be interesting to see what they have to say.
Cool.
If we're shooting for the moon, Cory Doctorow would be a really interesting person to have on as well.
He's starting his book tour, so he might be willing to come on and talk about his book.
There you go.
All they can say is no, is the
Right.
mindset I've gone into it with. We just have about 10 minutes left. So I want to talk about some gold guidance and grievances now that we have our special guest, Alan, with us. For listeners who are unfamiliar, or I guess new listeners, that would be, we like to do this thing called gold guidance and grievances, where we share something good, some advice that we have, any tips, and then anything that's bothering us right now. And I feel like last week, I'm sure you noticed, Alan, in last week's episode, we were a bit, or maybe it hasn't come out yet, but we were a bit jaded with our grievances. We're just like, there's a lot of badness in the world. But anyway, we do like to do them in reverse order because we like to end on a high note if we can, because it's really hard to come back from that once you're thoroughly bummed out. But let's start with our guest, our Alan. Do you have any gold guidance and grievances that you'd like to share with our audience?
We're going to start with grievances, right?
Yes, and then we'll
Okay.
go with that grievance.
So I have a quiz for you, Tim.
Okay, go.
Which earns more for the bad guys every year? Romance scams, BEC, or ransomware?
Wow. I love this.
Now, and the truth is, we don't actually know the answer, but going by estimates.
Yeah. So first off, I'm going to say I don't think it's ransomware. Like FBI has been really clear on that as far as the monetary. So it's between romance scams and BEC. And you know what? I'm going to go with maybe the dark horse here. I'm going to say romance scams.
That is correct. So romance scams are, again, we don't know the exact number, but earns somewhere between 20 and 30 times as much money as ransomware does in any given year. Instead of $2 or $3 billion, we're talking about 40 to $60 billion. And that's on the low end of estimates. And it's romance scams, BEC, and ransomware. But ransomware is the one that gets all of the attention in our industry. Now, part of that is we sell to people that are more impacted by ransomware, and it gets reported more often, although not as much. But also the other part of that is ransomware is the only one of those three that has its own PR arm, that has the bad guys constantly bragging about it. And I think it distracts us from where we need to focus our attention. So I guess my grievance is that we spend a lot of time on ransomware, and I'm not saying it's not impactful, because it very much is. But in terms of funding bad guys, it's, as far as we can tell, a distant third compared to BEC and romance scams.
Oh, like for years, I've been likening this to plane crashes versus automobile crashes, right? Like plane crashes make the news, car crashes don't. Car crashes claim far more lives, but they're not spectacular in a grim way, in the way that plane crashes are. And I feel like there's something similar there.
Yeah, 100% agreed. So then that leads to my guidance, which I think this week is also my gold. Did you all read about how Thailand dealt with a bunch of scammer farms in Myanmar?
I did not see this.
I did not see
They
that.
cut the power.
Hey,
So there were
wait a
these
minute. I've
campuses
seen
where,
that.
yeah, so there were these campuses where they knew that in Myanmar, where they had all of these scammers lined up, and for whatever reason, the police couldn't go in, couldn't take them down. And so they just shut the power down. And your phones only last so long without power. And so I like these kind of innovative solutions. And I think what we're seeing with law enforcement in general, whether we're talking about BC, whether we're talking about romance scams or ransomware, is they are getting more inventive in ways that they can disrupt these activity. And they're taking steps that probably they hadn't thought of, but it's like, all right, we need to do something. What can we do? And so I like seeing these out of the box operations as far as takedowns go.
I like that as your guidance and goal, and I like it a lot. I'll go to Taylor, and I want you to tell it like it's a spooky story based on
I know.
your
Yes, it does feel like I'm either going to tell you a campfire story or be in a police interrogation here in this little phone booth that I'm in.
Listen,
Let's
you
see.
dirty copper, I'm not going to give up anybody. I'm no narc.
You'll never get it from me. I will tell you my grievance first. So this started a few years back and really hit at the end of last year. And there is this thing, the Online Certificate Status Protocol, or the OCSP. So when you go out and provision yourself a certificate, it allows folks to ask the certificate trust, the store that's watching all the certs that are provisioned publicly, whether or not a cert is still valid. And as we see a lot of these specs around X509 or the certs or things like that, there's a lot of suggestions, and then there's not a lot of hard requirements around these things. And because things weren't required, the browsers never really took advantage of it in a way they could. They're sunsetting the OCSP. Now, there is a certificate revocation list there are other ways to solve this problem, but the folks behind our certs came up with a way, and we didn't use it, and they're taking it away from us. And that's a bummer. So I'll take that for my grievance. So it's a very niche grievance. I think there's maybe dozens of us.
Those are the best kind of grievances. That is old man yellow cloud type grievance.
And then I don't have a ton of guidance, but gold, I saw that ransomware payments were down 35% in 2024, which is phenomenal. Now, the other side is that it doesn't go nowhere. It ends up in, like, the folks that are behind this are not going to stop coming up with ways to separate folks from their money digitally or their assets or whatnot. But you see it push from the ransomware is very centralized. We can see it, and it's super visible when a casino shuts down or a hospital shuts down or whatnot. But then when there's a million people that get hit by scammers continuously, that just becomes more of a background noise. I'm here to take the wins where we can get them.
All right, Tim, what about you?
Yeah, for my grievance, where do I start?
Gestures at everything.
Yeah, exactly. Gestures at everything. I'm going to just tie that into my guidance, which is take care of yourself. Seriously, find joy where you can, because that you have to. That's going to be a really critical survival tactic amid, no matter how you feel about who you voted for, how you feel about what's going on, it's chaotic. There's a lot of upheaval. There's a lot of unknowns and question marks, and all of that is hard. So take care of yourself. For gold, I'm going to do two of them, but one of them that's more pretty specific to what it is that we all focus on all the time is the actor group called the Manipulators. Now, several of them are behind bars, and some of our folks that we work with in the day job potentially assisted with that. So that is really great news. And we always, as we talk about, giving bad guys bad days is an important way of looking at what it is that we do. The honorable mention for my gold is, as a musician, I was asked one time who were in my personal Hall of Fame for hackers, and one of the answers I gave was Frank Zappa. He was an original OG hacker in the sense that he always asked the question, what happens if you do this with music? And what he did was incredible. But you can find video of him predicting back in the 80s a lot of what's going on today from a civics perspective. So he was a visionary in more ways than one, and maybe Cassandra in that sense as well. But fascinating individual. Check him out.
Cool. That's
Two other hacker musicians in my mind, Gary Hill out of Boston, Phil Lesh out of the Grateful Dead. These are folks that were pushing the boundaries of what their instruments could do, coming up with new little bits of hardware to do it with. It's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Frank Zappa on one of the shows was like, it wasn't the Ed Sullivan show, but it was that era. He was on playing a bicycle. You can find that easily on YouTube.
Yeah, that sounds real. That sounds like I got to find that. That's
Yeah, you do.
Tom Schultz, Boston. Tom Schultz.
Yeah.
In Boston.
Tom Schultz, I think he has a degree from MIT. He was like a double E major or something at MIT. I may be getting that sort of wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's where he graduated from.
Rivers Cuomo went to Harvard, so I wouldn't be surprised. All right.
Hold on a second. Before we go,
Okay.
I have a request, not for this episode, because I don't want to put you on the spot,
Okay.
but I feel like Kali never does a gold guidance and grievance. And so for episode 201, I think Kali should also do a gold guidance and grievance.
Love it. Yes.
Okay. I will do a
Here for
golden
it.
Hour grievance. I typically don't because I'm not as technical as the three of you. So I typically just I'm like, aside.
There must be things you're the most
Yeah.
pleasant person I know, but there must be things that annoy you.
God, there are.
The next episode is an hour of grievances.
Nothing but grievances.
And one more thing.
I'm just gonna do. It's like I haven't really been doing them, so I'm just gonna do them all in one.
There you go. I've pent up for a year. This is really way before your time, Kali, but there was one episode of MASH where Hawkeye couldn't say anything bad about anybody for the whole episode. And then when his restriction was finally lifted, he got on the camp microphone and just let loose on everybody for 30 minutes straight. So that's what I want is Kali talking to the whole MASH camp with all of her grievances.
Yes.
One other thing.
I'm so here for that.
My dad's impression of me talking badly about anybody or anything is listen here, because my voice to him is super high. Listen here, you.
I will give you my Hulk voice changer if you want, so that it comes off a little scarier. I don't know if that'll make a difference or not.
I will. I'll take it because I think it would just be fun to play with. All right, my marching orders for episode 201. I will do a gold guidance and grievance. But thank you so much, everybody. This has been great. Allan, thank you so much for joining us for our 200th episode. It was great getting to talk with somebody who's been on the journey with us, essentially. Like you as a listener and being our champion has been so important to us, and we greatly appreciate it. We love all of our listeners. Thank you so much for sticking with us for 200 episodes, and hopefully there will be 200 plus more. Speaking of those episodes, there will be an all new one again next week. So stay tuned and we will catch you next time on Breaking Badness. Bye for now.
That's about all we have for this week. You can find us on Twitter @DomainTools. All of the articles mentioned today will be included in our blog post, which can be found at blog.domaintools.com. Catch us every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Pacific Time when we publish our podcast and blog. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next week on another episode of Breaking Badness. Until then, remember, don't drink and click.